Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. We do educational videos, and we have been doing a series of videos on biblical decodes, in particular the New Testament, and more specifically the Roman origins hypothesis of the New Testament. Many authors, recent and also going all the way back, have concluded that the New Testament was written by the Romans, by the Caesars, and in particular the Caesars from the Flavian dynasty of Caesars, and that includes Emperor Vespasian and his two sons, Emperors Titus and Domitian, and they were the rulers of the Roman Empire from 69 to 96 AD. And according to the theory, at least most of the proponents of the theory believe that these emperors wrote the Gospels by backdating them a little over 40 years and simultaneously writing a 7-volume work that they called War of the Jews, that they wrote under the name of Josephus. So Josephus's War of the Jews and the New Testament are companion pieces that really are intended to be read together, and when they are read together, it becomes obvious that they were written by the same people at the same time for the same reason, and that they have a myriad of, a literal myriad of obvious parallels between the two, and they convey a biting, mocking, ridiculing, and mean-spirited message for really anybody who believes in it, once you kind of understand what the code is. And we'll be going through that here very shortly. Right now, I'd just like to say we're in the middle of looking at this book from Michael Menescot's, Menasgotz, and that is called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. And this book came out 6 or 8 months ago. And so we'll be getting to that once I kind of explain what it's about and why he's doing what he's doing. So the Romans, the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty, wrote the New Testament in order as a piece of as a psychological operation, as a piece of wartime propaganda to pacify the Jews. The Jews had just been too militant, too revolutionary, too willing to die for their beliefs, for the Romans to be able to handle. They were just super high maintenance for the Romans. The Romans took over in Judea approximately 63 BC, and so this had been going on for over a century. Just revolutions and riots and uprisings, and the last straw was this War of the Jews that Josephus describes in 66 AD was the start, and that is when 3 Jewish zealots, and really you can think of them as really fulfillments of the Jewish prophecies, for the Old Testament prophecies for a Jewish Messiah. The Jewish Messiah that the Jews were waiting for was a military Messiah, somebody that was going to help them rise up and finally kick out the colonial power from Judea. And that's really what happened in 66 AD under the leadership of Eleazar, John, and Simon, these three Jewish zealots that kicked out the Herod puppet government of Judea that were, they were puppets of the Romans. They fled to Rome, and they didn't kick them out, they kicked them out of Jerusalem. And so Emperor Nero sent in General Vespasian to quell the revolt. And it took a real long time for it to go down. Vespasian was there for 3 years. Meanwhile, the Roman Civil War started. Emperor Nero was assassinated. 3 of his successors, Emperors Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, were all assassinated. And that led to General Vespasian being appointed as the new emperor, or however they do it. So Vespasian traveled to Rome to become the emperor, and he left the army in charge of his son Titus. So General Titus took 3.5 more years in order to finally subdue the Jews. So it was like a 7-year project to put down this revolt. And both Titus and Vespasian were wounded in the battle. So they were both basically like, enough of these Jews. Let's, use our strength. Let's use our specialty, which is psychological operations. They had done several psychological operations in the first century, including religion, created several religions. And so that's what they did. They created a story, backdated it by 40 years, and it was a story of a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace, and who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and who believed in walking an extra mile with the Roman soldiers' pack, and who believed in turning the other cheek to oppression, and who believed in the greatest faith of the Roman. The Roman slave owner had the greatest faith in all of Israel, and pleaded to his God to forgive the Romans, for they know not what they do, while at the same time barging in outside the temple and overturning the tables of the Jewish money changers who were trading the Roman money that had graven images on it for Jewish money, so that they could bring it into the temple as an offering, and disrupting the commerce of the Jews who were selling pigeons and doves for animal sacrifices in the temple. So Jesus is making a direct hit on the Jews and the Jewish rituals, while at the very same time he was being pro-Roman, or at least not anti-Roman. So that should give you at least some idea of why and how successful, how this was, really narrowly tailored toward its goals. Now, in addition to that, the Romans had a monopoly in the Roman Empire on censorship. Nothing was going to be published unless it met the approval of Caesar. And really the only 2 things that did meet the approval of Caesar during the first century were the works of the New Testament and the works of Josephus. and that's really our only documentation of the period, historically at least. And eventually, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the 1940s and 50s and translated way up into the 1990s, early 1990s. But perhaps the Romans used the Dead Sea Scrolls as some type of source material for the Gospels. They never mention anything about Jesus, but there are passages or stories about the teacher of righteousness, as well as the wicked priest and the liar. So different authors have had different ideas about who in the Gospels is representative of the teacher of righteousness. Some people think it is Jesus, but some people think it is James, and some people think it is John the Baptist. And also it's the same with the wicked priest and the liar. Some people think that Paul was the liar, and some of the Pharisees. We've gone through some of the Dead Sea Scrolls earlier in this series, so you could probably go back and look at some of the earlier Bible decodes, and maybe some videos earlier than that as well. But anyway, the main idea is that the Jews had this xenophobic God, xenophobic religion, where they saw themselves as the chosen people. They had all these quirky rituals, circumcision and kosher food laws and animal sacrifice and strictures against graven images, and they were willing to die for these things. And the Romans couldn't deal with it, so they created a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace, and then that was an attempt to mellow out the Jews, or to prune them, or to neutralize them, or neuter them, or tame them, domesticate them. And but they also left a lot of messages within, and so many different patterns of messages. So, for example, Jesus has a 3-year ministry in Judea. Titus has a 3-year military campaign in Judea, and they are set 40 years apart. Jesus is from 30 to 33 AD. Titus is from 70 to 73 AD. And as Josephus goes through the history of Titus's military campaign, he goes to various places and fights various battles and has various, adventures and lives through various events. Those same occurrences happen also to Jesus in his ministry. Every place that Titus goes, Jesus goes. And they have the same type or same concepts of events at each place, and they are offset by 40 years, sometimes to the hour. So these are parallels that other historians have noted, but haven't really added it up for. There are other sets of parallels as well. The life of Josephus is compared with the life of Jesus. Many of Jesus's prophecies are fulfilled by Titus, so that sets up Titus to be the second coming of Jesus. And this is where Michael Menesgatz comes in. After some of the other authors of the 21st century, Joseph Atwill especially, his Caesar's Messiah and Shakespeare's Secret Messiah. Back in the 20th century, Abelard Reuchlin and Roman Piso were at work. Reuchlin wrote The True Authorship of the New Testament, and Piso wrote a bazillion articles, and some of them are book length. And but then Menesgatz comes in. He takes a look at the book of Luke, and he finds as many parallels as he can from the book of Luke to the New Testament. To Josephus. He found over 250 parallels just in the book of Luke. And he goes through all of them in this book. And he goes through the various patterns, but he also finds another pattern, which is to graph them out on a chart. So he takes the book of Luke, 24 chapters, he puts them on the vertical axis. And then he takes War of the Jews by Josephus, 694 paragraphs, and he puts them on the horizontal axis. He graphs whenever he finds a parallel, he puts a dot at the corresponding location. And after plotting 250 plus such dots, he discovers that he has created 5 near perfect letters in Latin, APTVS. Now we all know that Latin is the language of the Romans, especially the Roman elite. They also used extensively Greek, especially the commoners, but also the royals both spoke and wrote in Greek and Latin. You probably know that the New Testament is written in Greek, and so is Josephus. Although Josephus makes an offhand comment about how the original version was written in the father tongue, but that could just be his father, meaning Vespasian, as opposed to Titus. But anyway, the chances that the APTVS pattern would have appeared by coincidence is nil, and the fact that they're written in Latin shows you something already. But the TVS stands for Titus Vespasianus and was used as an imprint for some of the Roman coins minted during this time period. And the AP is a little bit mysterious. Menescot's has a little bit slightly different theories about this than I do. But right now he's going over some of the parallels that are in the A and the P. And these are much weaker parallels, kind of just like they slapped it together. And you can see from the thumbnail how the A and the P are not nearly as well developed as the V and the S. The T's kind of in the middle, but the V and the S are like many, many parallels, and the V and the S are really well developed, and the parallels are much more well developed also. They're much more convincing, and they're much more detailed and well hidden. They put a lot more thought into them than they put into the A and the P parallels. They kind of just slap these together to put these dots. So the theory is that the A and the P were probably written at a later period. Especially since the subject matter of the A and the P goes back before 66 AD. So it could have just been like an introduction that was written later. But he's going to go over these parallels one at a time here, and hopefully we'll have time to go through a few of them. They're all pretty short and not very well, you know. They are parallels, but they're, you know, some of them are pretty weak, and they could certainly be mistaken for coincidences separately. But then when you have hundreds of them, then that becomes a little bit less, you know, you're a little bit less able to dismiss them as, you know, coincidence. Okay, this is Jewish War, paragraph 114. Book 1, Book 1, Chapter 17, paragraph 2. Pheroras would have given him 50 talents as a price to avoid Josephus being beheaded. Antigonus's party brought the principal of Herod's men and drowned them. This is matched up with Luke 16, verses 5 and 6. And he said 100 measures or baths of oil. And he said to him, take your bill, the price, and sit down quickly and write 50. Now he says that the 100 measures or baths of oil is a metaphor for drowning. I don't know where he's getting that, or what that's coming from. It is possible that it's from a different part of Roman tradition, or a Hebrew tradition. Who knows? Or maybe he's just making that up. So it's a pretty weak parallel. Here's Jewish War 109, Book 1, Chapter 16, Paragraph 4. Herod sent men down in a chest from above to attack those in caves, and he sent in fire and burned them. And this is matched up with Luke 17:29. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven, or from above, and destroyed them all. Okay, fire from heaven. Jewish War 116. Herod marched to avenge his brother's death, and there was a providential sign as he feasted, and when the guests left, the house fell down. Luke 15:23. The elder son was in the field, and the younger son returned. The father said, "Bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For my son was dead and is alive again." And he came to the house and heard music and dancing. So, brother's death and feasting and a house. So, Jewish War 118, Herod marched with rage to a village, and in every house the upper rooms were crowded with soldiers for their defense. Herod pulled the houses to pieces and had the roof shaken down, and the multitude slain in heaps was so great that the conquerors could not pass along the roads. When the multitude which was gathered saw, they dispersed themselves and fled. Luke 14:8 and further on up to 21. When you are bidden by any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room. And a man bade many to a great supper, and they all began to make excuses to leave. So he said, "Go quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in hither the poor, the maimed, the halt, and blind." I guess that's referring to the multitude. So otherwise, the highest room or the upper rooms, and dispersing themselves. Not a lot there. You certainly would have to be looking for that parallel to find it. But if you know the pattern, then you do know that there's going to be a parallel there. Now, that it is a parallel, but it's not something that you would be notable unless there were hundreds of others. Okay, this is Jewish War 119. That evening, the same day after the battle, Herod was still hot in his armor from the battle and went to bathe. Herod encountered some enemy soldiers in the baths, hiding from the battle. They trembled and ran by him in flight, despite him being naked. And Herod was content that no harm came to him, so those men escaped in safety. Matched up with Luke 13:31. It was that same day that there came certain Pharisees saying, "Get you out and depart hence, for Herod will kill you." So Herod will kill you that same day, and get out, or get out, or run by him. Okay, Jewish War 120. Now, Menescott, yesterday in the text, he did warn us that there wasn't much to this particular set of parallels. So it's not like he's presenting these as being strong. He's just presenting them and saying they are worthy of putting dots there, but this isn't going to be strong evidence for a conspiracy for a psychological operation. But it is for the fact that the Romans literally signed their names to the book of Luke. They wanted you to discover this at some point, as long as it wasn't during their lifetime. Okay, this is Jewish War 120. Now Herod marched on Jerusalem and brought his army to the wall, this being the 3rd year since he had been made king at Rome, and pitched camp by the temple, where a gate is that was implicitly shut, for on that side it might be besieged, and raised 3 banks, digging a trench around it, around Jerusalem, and returned to pitch camp at the north wall. This is matched up with Luke 13, 6, and then all the way up to 29. A certain man had a fig tree and came and found no fruit. He said, "These 3 years I come seeking fruit and find none. Cut it down." And the vineyard kept replying, saying, "Let it alone until I dig around it and fertilize it. And if it still does not bear fruit, then cut it down." And he journeyed toward Jerusalem. "Strive to enter at the strait gate, and many will seek to enter and shall not be able to. The master of the house has shut the door, and you begin to stand outside and knock, saying, 'Open to us,' and they shall come from east, west, north, and south, and sit down surround on 4 sides in the kingdom of God." So that's a little bit stronger. Herod and 3 years journeying toward Jerusalem, making camp around the temple, digging around a trench, or digging, and then getting to the gate and the 4 locations, north, south, east, and west. So those are all there. They're a little bit hidden, but that's a legit, like, pretty halfway interesting parallel that is like that stretches the limits of coincidence. You could still call it a coincidence, but makes you wonder at least. Perhaps barring the last 2 examples, these still aren't very. This is from the text. Perhaps barring the last 2 examples, these still aren't very strong parallels, and certainly they are not particularly interesting. The reader will note that we are about 1/3 of the way through paragraphs 86 through 150 of Jewish War, and about 1/3 of the way through Luke, but working backwards through Luke. So this is the right-hand side of the A. It's a diagonal line. As you move further along in War of the Jews, you move backwards through Luke. The point of showing these parallels is that they are the strongest parallels in this region of Jewish war, and the focus of my analysis will be on how parallels that are noteworthy, if only by virtue of being the strongest parallels in that region, are arranged to form an improbably straight and thin line, which is the diagonal line of the A, or really all of the lines of the A. Okay, let's see if we can flip the page here and maybe dig into a couple more. Okay, this next one is Jewish War 121 and 2. This paragraph of Jewish War is expanded on by Antiquities, which is Josephus's 20-volume work that he wrote about 20 years later called Antiquities of the Jews. And so that was probably written to kind of fill in some of the blanks, here in the Jewish War, and perhaps to historicize a few other things, and probably for many other reasons. I've read about the first half, maybe the first 10 volumes of it. They're relatively short volumes. But it pretty much tells the same story as the Old Testament, but kind of just from Josephus's perspective, which is the Roman perspective. So this paragraph of Jewish War is expanded on by Jewish Antiquities, Book 14, 468 and 474, saying, Sosius returned after his wedding and met his commanders and Herod at the walls of Jerusalem with 11 battalions to lay siege. And the walls of Jerusalem shook due to their siege engines, which I think are like their catapults. The Jews burned their siege engines, but Sosius set fire to the cloisters of the temple of Jerusalem. And in the city they got together, robbing food from each other. This is matched up with Luke 12:35 to 39. Be like men that wait for their Lord, when he will return from the wedding, that when he comes and knocks, they may open to him immediately. If the good man of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not have suffered his house to be broken through. Okay, so a wedding, and entering and breaking into or robbing. A thief. Okay, Jewish War 122. The Jews in Jerusalem were divided into several factions, and bold men got together and robbed others because there was no food. And this is Luke 11:17. He said, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation,